There is a line in the contestant eligibility rules for the family face-off that has been in there since the first season. It is not dramatic. It is one sentence of legal language that says a competing team must consist of 5 individuals related to one another by blood or by marriage. Nobody ever thought about it. It is the kind of sentence that exists in every rulebook in television. Put there by a lawyer in an office a long time ago, and for more than 20 years it did exactly what it was supposed to do, and hurt nobody. Then a 61-year-old woman from Sapulpa, Oklahoma, filled out an application, and that one sentence turned into a wall, and on a Monday afternoon Ray Calloway stood on his own stage and rewrote it out loud, and it has never been changed back. Before we get into what 4 kids said when the announcer did not know what to call them, do us a quick favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because a story about a house on Osage Avenue deserves to reach every person who has ever wondered whether what they do all day actually matters. Now let me tell you about Verna Ledbetter. Verna Ledbetter was 61 years old and had been a licensed foster parent in Creek County, Oklahoma for 22 years. 68 kids had come through her house in that time. She keeps the number the way some people keep a mileage log, not proudly, just accurately, because it is a fact, and she is a factual woman. 68. She and her husband Gil started in 2003. They had tried for children for 11 years and it had not happened, and Verna has said in exactly one interview that they stopped trying on a Tuesday and called the state on a Thursday, and that she does not want to talk about the part in between, and she never has. Gil Ledbetter was 64 and worked at a rental yard, forklifts and scaffolding, and had the personality of a man who has been quietly handling things for a long time. Verna had worked 29 years in housekeeping at a hospital in Tulsa before her back gave out, and after that the fostering was the whole job. Now, I am going to tell you about the 4 kids who were in that house, and I want to be clear about something first, because it matters. I am not going to tell you why any of them are in foster care. That is theirs. Every one of those children has a reason they came into that house, and the reasons belong to them, and to their families, and to a courthouse in Oklahoma, and they are not entertainment. If you have spent any time around this, you know that the single most exhausting thing about being a kid in care is that everybody you meet wants the story. So there is no story here. There are 4 kids and a house on Osage Avenue. Deshaun, everybody called him Dez, was 16. He had been in Verna's house for 2 years and 4 months, which was the longest he had been anywhere since he was 8. He was quiet in the specific way that is not shyness. He did not unpack his duffel bag for the first 5 months. He was very good at math and would not admit it. Simina, Mena, was 14, 15 months in the house. She was the one who noticed everything, which is a skill children develop for reasons nobody would choose for them. She could read a room in about 4 seconds, and she was funny in a dry way that landed harder than it should have coming from a 14-year-old. Colleen, Coco, was 11, had been there 8 months, and was the most serious person in that house, by a considerable distance. She kept a list of chores she was assigned, and a separate list of chores she did, and she checked them against each other. And Micah was 9, had been there almost 3 years, and was, by universal agreement of everybody who has ever met him, a menace. In the good way. Micah had opinions, volume, and no filter whatsoever. There was a 5th, Emmett, who was 7, and who had come in that spring, and who does not play in this story except at the very end, and you will see why. Here is the thing about that house that turned into the whole point of this. Those 5 children were not related to each other. Not one of them. 4 different last names on 4 different case files out of 3 different counties. They were not related to Verna and Gil either, in any way a piece of paper would recognize. And Verna Ledbetter had a rule she had followed for 22 years, which was that she never asked a child to call her anything. Not mom. Not aunt. Nothing. She has explained why, and her explanation is the hinge of this entire story. They've got people, she said. Every one of them has got people out there somewhere, and it is not my job to stand in front of them. My job is that this house is warm, and the food is hot and nobody yells and you know where you sleep tonight. She said, I'm not going to ask a child to give me something I can't promise to keep. So in that house, she was Verna. All 68 of them, 22 years, just Verna. The family face-off came into it because of a Wednesday night. Verna had a thing she did. Wednesday was game night, which sounds like a wholesome television detail, and which was actually a piece of practical child psychology that she arrived at by trial and error over about a decade. Kids who come into a house do not know how to be in a room with each other. They do not know the rhythms. They have never had the thing where a family fights over a board game and nobody actually gets hurt, and it is a genuinely difficult skill to learn at 9 or 11 or 16. So on Wednesdays, everybody played something. Cards, dominoes, whatever. It was mandatory, and every kid hated it for about 3 weeks, and then it became the best night of the week. And on those Wednesdays, the television was on at 6, and it was always the same show. Mina is the one who found the application. She was 13 at the time. She filled the whole thing out on Verna's laptop and left it open on the kitchen table for Verna to find, which is a 14-year-old's way of asking for something without having to ask for it. Verna submitted it. And then, 4 months later, a casting producer called the house, and everybody in the kitchen lost their minds, and Micah told his entire third-grade class the next morning. And then the paperwork came back. Because here is what happened when the show's standards office got a look at that application. 5 contestants. 4 different surnames. No blood relation between any of them. No legal guardianship in the adoptive sense. Foster placement is not adoption. And the state of Oklahoma, not Verna Ledbetter, was the legal custodian of every child in that house. The eligibility rule said blood or marriage. The answer was no. It was not a cruel no. That is important, and Verna has always been fair about it. The woman who delivered it, a standards executive named Marion Quist, who had been with that show for 16 years, was doing exactly the job she was paid to do, which is to keep a network out of the position of putting 4 legal minors in state custody on national television without ironclad authority to do it. Minors in care have real protections around media. And those protections exist because of real things that have happened to real kids. Marion Quist was not a villain. She was a wall. But she was a wall. What Verna Ledbetter did next took 11 weeks. She got consent from 4 different caseworkers in 3 different counties. She got sign-off from 2 judges. She tracked down and got written permission from 3 separate biological family members who had a legal say, one of whom she had to find through a church directory. She filled out a media authorization packet for each child individually, and the packet for Coco alone was 31 pages. She drove to Oklahoma City twice. Gil took unpaid days off the rental yard to sit in county offices with her. She has said the whole thing was not hard. Exactly, she said. It's just a lot of Tuesdays. But Gil has told it differently, and Gil is the one who was in the truck. He said there was a Thursday in the middle of it where they drove 2.5 hours to Oklahoma City for a signature, and the person they needed had gone home sick, and they drove 2.5 hours back, and Verna did not say one word the entire way. He said she made dinner that night, and ran homework, and got everybody down. And then he came out at 11 and found her at the kitchen table with the whole stack in front of her, going through it again page by page, checking for anything she had missed. He said, Verna, they're gonna say no. And she said, probably. He said, then why are you doing that? And Verna Ledbetter said, because Micah told his whole class. That is the actual reason. Not principle, not fairness, not a television show. A 9-year-old had stood up in a 3rd-grade classroom in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, and told 22 children that he was going to be on TV with his family, and a woman decided she was going to spend 11 weeks and 400 pages making sure that boy did not have to walk back into that room and take it back. And after 11 weeks, she sent the entire stack in, and 2 weeks before the taping, the answer was still no. Because the consents solved the legal problem, and the legal problem was never the actual problem. The actual problem was the sentence. Blood or marriage. Verna Ledbetter had produced a mountain of paperwork proving she was allowed to bring those children. And none of it made them a family under a rule written in an office in the 1990s. Somewhere in there, and the show has never said exactly how, though everybody assumes Marion Quist herself is the one who walked it upstairs, because she is the only one who could have. That file got in front of Ray Calloway. He read it, and then he made a phone call to Sapulpa, Oklahoma. And Verna Ledbetter has said that the only thing she remembers about that call is that she was standing in her own kitchen holding a dish towel, and she did not sit down the entire time. They flew to Atlanta in November. Gil sat in the front row of that audience with 7-year-old Emmett on his lap, because Emmett was too young for the podium and had cried about it. And Gil had told him he had the better seat. And then the thing happened that nobody had thought about. There is an announcer on that show. Before every taping, he says the same sentence he has said 10,000 times: "Please welcome the such-and-such family." That is how it goes. One surname, every time. They had 4 surnames and none of them was Ledbetter. The floor crew figured it out about 20 minutes before the doors opened, and there was a small quiet panic about it, and somebody went and asked Ray, and Ray Calloway said, "Don't fix it. Leave it. I'll handle it out there." So the audience came in, the lights came up, and Ray Calloway walked out and told 200 people that there was a problem with the show today, and that he needed their help with it. He explained it plainly. He said there was a rule in this program that said a family had to be related by blood or by marriage. He said there was a lady from Oklahoma out back who had spent 11 weeks and about 400 pages proving she was allowed to bring 4 kids to a game show. And he said the show had told her no, twice, and that he had read the file himself. Then he said, "So we're going to change the rule. Today, on camera. And I want y'all to be witnesses to it." And he did. Ray Calloway stood at center stage and said that from that afternoon forward, the eligibility rule on the family face-off would read that a competing team must consist of 5 individuals related by blood, by marriage, or by having lived under the same roof and looked after one another for at least 1 year. That is the actual language. It is still in the rule book. Every person who works on that show calls it the Ledbetter Clause, and it has been used 11 times since, and 2 of those 11 were group homes. The audience was already on their feet, and the family had not even come out yet. Then Ray turned to the wings and said, "Now here's my other problem." He walked over to the announcer's booth, on camera, and he said, "Charlie, don't say anything. I'm doing this one." And the 4 kids and Verna Ledbetter walked out under those lights, with no introduction at all. Ray met them at the podium. He got the 4 kids arranged, shortest to tallest, and Verna at the end, and then he said, right into the microphone, to all of them, "Here's the deal. I've got to tell 200 people who you are, and I don't have a name to give them. There's 4 last names at this podium." He crouched down a little. "So y'all tell me, what do I call you?" There was a pause. You can watch it. It is about 6 seconds long, and it is the 6 most uncomfortable seconds ever aired on that program, because 4 children looked at the floor and nobody said anything, and a 61-year-old woman at the end of the podium said, very quickly, "They've all got their own names. That's fine, you can just say the kids from Oklahoma." And Des said, Ledbetter, 16 years old, 2 years and 4 months in that house, had not unpacked his bag for 5 months. He said it into the microphone, flat, like it was obvious. Ray said, "Say again, son?" And Des said, "Ledbetter, we're the Ledbetters." Mena said, "Ledbetter, Coco, 11 years old, extremely serious," said Ledbetter, and then, because she is who she is, added, "That's what I put on my school forms anyway." And Micah, 9, at full volume, said, "Ledbetter," and did a thing with his arms. Verna Ledbetter had been a foster parent for 22 years and had put 68 children through her house without once asking a single one of them to call her anything, and 4 of them just handed it to her on national television without being asked. She did not make a sound. That is what people remember. She put one hand flat over her mouth and stood absolutely still at the end of that podium with tears coming straight down her face and did not make one sound, because a woman like that does not do that in front of her kids. Gil Ledbetter, in the front row with a 7-year-old on his lap, put his face in his hand. Ray Calloway straightened up, turned to 200 people and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Ledbetter family. That studio came apart for a long time. There is one more thing about that moment that did not come out until months later, and it is the detail that people bring up the most. Ray Calloway had known. Not that they would say Ledbetter, nobody could have known that. But he had known there was no name to announce. And he had been told about it 20 minutes before the doors opened, and he had told the crew to leave it alone. A producer asked him afterward why he had done that. Why put 4 kids in a 6-second silence on live tape, with no safety net, when the show could have simply printed the Oklahoma family on a card and moved on? And Ray said, because if we name them, it's ours. If they name themselves, it's theirs. He said, I was ready to catch it if it went the other way. If none of them had said anything, I'd have made a joke and we'd have played a game show and nobody would have known the difference. Then he said, but you don't take that away from a kid on the chance it might be awkward. That's their name. Somebody had to give them the room to say it. Now here is what I want you to understand about the game itself, because it is the part that gets missed. Those 4 kids had never played a game as a family in their lives. Not the way that show works. Wednesday nights at Verna's house were the closest any of them had come, and they had had 8 months, 15 months, 2 years, 3 years of it. Before that, nothing. Mina said in an interview later that she had genuinely never in her life been on a team with somebody where losing did not have a consequence. You could see it in the first round. They played like 4 separate people standing next to each other. Nobody looked at anybody. When Coco got an answer right and scored, she just stood there. Des actually said good job to her in the tone you use with a coworker, and Ray Calloway, who has hosted 8,000 families, saw it in about 90 seconds and stopped the game. Hold up, he said. Hold up. Y'all won that round. What are you doing? Des said, what? And Ray said, you're supposed to lose your minds. That's the whole thing. Come here. And he walked over and physically moved those 4 kids into a huddle at the podium, put Verna in the middle of it, and said, now that's how you do it. Every time. I don't care if it's 4 points. They did it for the rest of the afternoon. Every single round. It got funnier every time, because Micah escalated it each round until by the end of the game he was jumping and Coco had started counting the jumps out loud. And somewhere in the 3rd round, the thing Ray was actually after started happening on its own. Mena gave a bad answer. A genuinely bad one, a strike, on a question she should have had. And she went stiff at that podium in a way that anybody who has been around kids in care will recognize instantly. That is not disappointment. That is a child waiting to find out what it costs. And Des, 16 years old, who had said maybe 11 words all afternoon, leaned over and said, that was terrible. Mina said, I know. And he said like historically bad. And she laughed. On camera, at a podium, in front of 200 people, a 14-year-old girl laughed at herself over a mistake, and her brother, and I am going to call him that, because 4 kids at that podium had already settled the question, went right back to the game. Verna Ledbetter said later that was the moment she cried about in the hotel that night, not the name. That. The rest of that taping is a comedy. Micah, 9 years old, got a question about what people do in the shower and gave an answer that had to be cut, and then got a second question about what mothers say too much and said Micah, which is the single biggest laugh in that episode. Mena was the best player on the stage and it was not close. Coco answered every question like she was giving a deposition. And Des, quiet, guarded, 16-year-old Des, turned out to be a killer at the buzzer, and every time he got one right he looked over at Verna first. They beat the Sandoval family of Fresno, California, by 110. Des and Mena played fast money, a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old, which the show had also never done. And they cleared 200 with 12 points to spare on Mina's last answer, which was to the question name something that takes a long time to feel normal. Her answer was a new house. Number 1 on the board, 48 points. $20,000 fell out of the ceiling onto the Ledbetter family of Sapulpa, Oklahoma. The episode aired in February. Here is what happened after, and this part is honest, because the honest version is better than the version people expect. People expect the ending where everybody gets adopted. That is not what happened, and it is not what should happen, and the reason is worth 30 seconds of your time. The goal of foster care is not adoption. The goal is a permanent, safe home for a child, And the first choice, the actual first choice, by law and by decency, is going back to their own family, if that can be made safe. Adoption is what happens when it cannot. A story where every kid gets adopted by the nice lady is a story where 5 families failed, and nobody who does this work would call that a happy ending. So here is where those kids actually went. Mina went home. 14 months after that taping, she was reunified with her aunt in Tulsa, which is what everybody involved had been working toward the entire time she was in that house. She is 17 now, and she is at Verna's every other Sunday, and she calls it going over there, not going back. Coco moved to a permanent placement with a family in Bristow that had been in process before any of this happened. She is 13. She still keeps 2 lists, and Verna and Gil Ledbetter adopted Des and Micah. Des was 17 when it went through, which is very late, and adoptions of teenagers are rare, and Des had said out loud more than once in his life that he did not want one. What changed his mind, according to Verna, was not the show and not the money. It was that in the 11 weeks she spent on that paperwork, Des watched a grown woman fight a wall for 4 kids who were not hers, and lose, and go back at it, and lose again. He is 19 now. He is in his 2nd year at a community college in Tulsa, and he is studying accounting. Because he was always good at math and eventually admitted it. Emmett, the 7-year-old in the front row on Gil's lap, went home to his mother 8 months later, which was the outcome everybody wanted, and he is fine, and that is the last thing I will say about him. The $20,000 did not change that family's life, because $20,000 does not. It fixed a roof, and it paid for a used van with 3 rows, which for a foster home is not a luxury item, it is infrastructure. But the rule changed. That is the thing that outlived all of it. The Ledbetter clause has put 11 teams on that stage who could not have been there before. 2 group homes. A grandmother raising 4 grandchildren with no legal adoption in place. A house of 5 adults who had been roommates for 9 years and are as much a family as anybody reading this. Child welfare organizations picked that clip up hard, and the specific thing they used it for was the recruitment problem, which is the least glamorous and most urgent thing in that entire system. There are not enough homes. There have never been enough homes. Applications to become licensed foster parents rose measurably in several states in the 6 months after that episode aired, and while nobody can prove a television show did that, the people who run those programs will tell you what they think. Verna Ledbetter is 64 now and still licensed. There are 3 kids in that house at the moment. Wednesday is still game night. She is still Verna to every one of them, and she still does not ask, and she never will. Somebody asked her once whether it hurt, doing this for 22 years, knowing most of them leave, and she said, "They're supposed to leave. That's the job. If it worked, they leave." Then she said the thing that ended up on a poster in about 2,000 social work offices. "I'm not their last stop. I'm just the part where somebody's paying attention." Ray Calloway keeps a copy of the amended eligibility rule framed in his office. It is a boring piece of paper, 1 sentence with an addition on the end of it. He was asked about it and he said, "I've given away more money than I can count on that stage, and I've never changed one thing about how anything works. That's the only rule I ever touched. Took 11 weeks off a woman's life to make me look at it, and about 9 seconds to fix. That's usually the math on those, isn't it?" If this story got to you the way it got to everybody in that studio, do 2 things before you go. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with somebody who works in that world. A caseworker, a court advocate, a teacher who has one of these kids in her class and knows it. And second, if you have ever thought about it, even once, look up how to get licensed in your state. You do not have to be rich. You do not have to be young. You do not have to be married. There is a house in Sapulpa, Oklahoma that has had 68 children sleep safe in it. And it belongs to a retired hospital housekeeper with a bad back and a husband who drives a forklift, and the only thing she ever did was make sure the food was hot, nobody yelled, and everybody knew where they were sleeping that night. That is the whole job. And 4 kids at a podium on national television, with 4 different last names, decided that was worth calling a family.